Today on the podcast, you'll hear my interview with conductor Nicholas McGegan, whose creativity and obvious joy in the work is contagious. Sometimes on this podcast, it is just a pleasure to listen to a great artist talk about the art. An expert in 18th century style, Nicholas McGegan is in his sixth decade on the podium, following a 34-year tenure as music director of Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra and Chorale. He is now music director emeritus. He's also principal guest conductor of Hungary's Capella Savaria. I loved this conversation because the creativity, the innovation, the improvisatory feeling that Nick is able to produce in his orchestras comes through loud and clear in this conversation as well. I know that you will find this as inspiring as I do. Nicholas McGegan, welcome to Crushing Classical.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
I am so delighted to speak with you about the long and winding career that you have created for yourself. I'm dying to pick your brain on ways that younger musicians and new musicians can create similar bodies of work. But before we launch in, could we just have you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners and tell just a little bit of the story that brings us to where we are now?
Okay, well, I'm Nicholas McGegan, which is got nobody else wanted the name, so I've got them. And you can probably tell that I'm not from California, which is where you're talking to me, but I was born between London and Cambridge in the UK and studied there. And when I was about 29, in fact, exactly on my birthday, I was invited to come to teach as artist in residence at Washington University in St. Louis in 79, and I've been more or less living in first of all Missouri and now California ever since. And in fact, I've been living in the Bay Area 40 years exactly. So 40 years ago in 1985, I gave my first concerts in this area and still living here happily at the not, I hope, too great age of 75.
Incredible. So tell a little bit about like what those early years looked like. How does a person begin to be a famous conductor and the leader of a famous period ensemble?
Well, famous, I'm not sure about, but well, first of all, it depends, of course, a lot on who your parents are. I felt I was quite lucky in not having musical parents. They were in the arts. My mother was an oil painter, uh, and quite well known one, and my father was a professor of architectural history. So they were in the arts, but they didn't try to sort of say, "Oh, you play a scale like this," or tell me how to do music. On the other hand, if I tried to draw a circle freehand, which is something my mother could do absolutely perfectly, mine ended up looking like a donut. So I was supported, but not professionally in the sense that they told me how to do things. They gave me, I had a piano, which was lovely. And as soon as I could reach it, I started to play it. And then about 3 or 4 years later, when my hands grew big enough, I started to learn the flute. You can't play flute when you're really tiny, and no self-respecting parent wants their kid to learn the piccolo if they value their lives. So,
Mhm.
and the great thing about the flute, of course, is that the worse you are, the less noise it makes. Unlike the oboe or the trumpet, where you're basically spending your time trying to tame an instrument which is too loud, and your job is to make it softer. If you're not a very good flute player, it just sounds like a gas leak, and you slowly have to learn to make the noise. So
Yes.
I was very lucky. I went to a very good school, what in America would be called a private school, but in England's a public school, but a public day school. And so I would still go home at night. But we had fantastic music programs. Fun enough, the main person who taught music came from America, and he founded a wind band and all the. So I actually learned to play the Star Spangled Banner and things like that, and Stars and Stripes with a tricky piccolo solo. I learned all that when I was at school, along with the more traditional things that you have to learn in British schools of that type, which is Latin, Greek, ancient history, and of course French. They're not nearly taught as much as they used to be, but I'm very glad I went through the full classical works. And when we also had a Saturday morning music school, which was terrific, and that's where I first learned to conduct because there was a string ensemble, and I was the only one who didn't play a string instrument. So they kind of said, "Well, you look really, really useless, and we keep getting lost. So why don't you stand in front of us and keep us together?" And I think I was about 16 at the time. So that's where I started really to conduct. And then I went to Cambridge University, which is a place where they teach you how to think rather than teach you anything specific. It's a very You don't do anything for credit, for example. You just have to pass the exams. Um, but you have to think a lot, and the questions are all very oblique and fun. And you have to argue points of view. You have to play instruments, but again, not for credit. Um, I had a wonderful time there. And one of the courses that I did really badly was the the acoustics of buildings and instruments. And you do have to pass an exam in that. It was how a violin works, why one concert hall sounds good and the other one sounds like a shoebox, looks like a shoebox, sounds like a shoebox. Um, So that was that involved maths, which I'm really hopeless at. But luckily I had a very good teacher who was a collector of 18th century wind instruments, and he said, "Oh, you play the flute? Let me lend you an 18th century flute." So he actually lent me a real one from the 18th century, an antique, and I borrowed it for the best part of 40 years. Uh, and when this nice man Nicholas, or later Sir Nicholas Shackleton, died, he left his collection to Edinburgh University, and I then left this flute that I had borrowed so that it could to the same university so he could rejoin his collection. So that's where I got the Baroque bug, as it were. But what was kind of fun was that Nick had a tenant living in the top of the house whose name was Chris Hogwood. And he, Nick said, "Well, you might want to come play flute sonatas sometime. He's got this harpsichord here, and you're learning the flute. We'll put the two together, and you can play a little." So we did, and I joined his orchestra after that as second flute. Had a great time. Went on tour with them a lot, and then I went to Oxford, which was great fun. Keep up the unreality, if you like. And there I met Jane Glover, who's another of my colleagues, uh, and we were the tearaways of Oxford. We'd spend a lot of time drinking beer in the garden and having a good laugh. I see her not nearly enough, but I just adore her. And so uh, that's my sort of academic side, which I left eventually because I was playing a lot in the period instrument orchestras that started to form in the 70s with
Hmm.
Chris Hogwood, Trevor Pinnock, John Elliott Gardner, Roger Norrington. I played either harpsichord or first or second flute for each one of those people. And it was a very exciting time because we were doing things that hadn't been done, at least in England, on period instruments. We did remember Haydn's Creation that hadn't been done on period instruments for, well, ever since the period was the period, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, recording complete Mozart symphonies with Chris Hogwood, working on Rameau operas with John Elliott Gardner. It was all very, very good fun, and it was a great way to cut one's teeth. Um, and I taught at the Royal College of Music. I was the youngest professor they've ever had. I think I was 23, I think, teaching Baroque flute in academia. So I had a great time in the 70s. And it was cutting edge stuff we were doing. Nowadays, playing on period instruments is kind of quite establishment, but it wasn't back then. We're talking 50 years ago. It was a very different beastie. And then in 79, I came here.
There are so many fascinating threads I want to pull on from that story if I can. Like, first
Sure.
of all, just the curiosity and the intellectual play that I'm hearing you talk about is just enchanting. Is there any place that teaches in that way now? I don't know that there is.
Well, it's hard to teach something that's when we were doing the period instruments, I could I couldn't learn it from a teacher. There wasn't one. I had to go to the library. I could get out for the library in those days an 18th century book on how to play the flute. I mean, a real one. Sit in my rooms in Cambridge and huff and puff away like the big bad wolf, practicing from the fingering charts and things. Then I went to teach it myself, and so it's all second, third, fourth generation of these people now. Funny enough, you're talking to me right now, but I just came from Juilliard, where I was working with the J415, which is the period instrument group they have there, wonderful group. And, they have teachers of Baroque violin, teachers of Baroque flute, and so
Mhm.
on. I'm sometimes working with their teachers, uh, which is great. So now you can study this at many campuses. Oberlin is obviously another one. Juilliard is the main one. And I was working with singers. They have a wonderful thing at Yale called the ISM, the Institute of Sacred Music, where they specialize in singing Bach. And to have those singers work, they sing a lot of sacred music in church, so they have to be able to sight read, which is not uh, taught as much as it should be, I think, in the US compared to Europe. And these singers are absolutely terrific. So we put the two of those together, slightly different topic here, to do a Handel oratorio with Yale and Juilliard. And those places are doing wonderful work in this way.
It's fascinating. I feel like I also hear, we have the internet now in a way that you did not have in the 70s. And the thing that feels lost is the idea that you could like grab that 18th century quantz treatise or whatever and like huddle up in your room just exploring and puffing away and fiddling around with the ideas. Like, I don't know where in our modern society we have the space for that kind of deep work anymore.
I don't know that you do. Of course, the one thing that's absolutely wonderful is that in places like Juilliard, I believe, there are endless courses. And so you could, even if you're a classical pianist, you could take a course on jazz improvisation, which wasn't taught back when. You
Mhm.
could also learn to play harpsichord continuo. You could learn to just improvise in the style of Mozart. Uh, that all that stuff is there available now, which it certainly wasn't when I was there. Well, not Juilliard, but at Cambridge. We learnt to
Right.
do all sorts of things. So we did have to improvise, but and transpose and all those things. The thing I really like, though, I'm very glad that I had that academic background. It's a little bit like being an ice skater or an ice dancer, where the bit you never see is them doing perfect circles and all that. Those like a painter can draw.
Yeah, the
Uh,
the like the sort of serious classical
a
training
serious background, a
that
serious
is the
classical training.
it's
Um,
that's the foundation of all of the innovation that comes from there.
Absolutely. And I find that one of the things I really enjoyed, particularly about Institute of Sacred Music singers at Yale, is that they have that academic singing as opposed to, say, when I was teaching at the Royal College, um, many of the singers who were going to do opera were excused having to do music theory or learn harmony and counterpoint, which meant that they were just basically ignorant of something that they would then need to know what part of a chord they were singing. Were they singing the tonic, the dominant? There's a singing treatise from about 1812, I think, which says that the three things a singer needs to learn in order to have a career, one was to be able to trill, which not many singers can, and the other was a full understanding of harmony and counterpoint so as to be able to improvise your ornaments.
Mhm.
Not taught. Could be taught, could be. Uh, and even in places like Juilliard, the singers are a little remote from the period instrument group, which is why I think we're so lucky to do it with Yale, which is just up the street, where they have all the right singers and a fabulous chorus too.
Hmm. It's fascinating. I also just love the framing that as a that as a period instrument specialist you were breaking new ground because that feels so foreign to where we sit now. And I've played with the music of the Baroque and with Dame Jane Glover,
Sure.
and it's
Yeah.
fantastic. It's so exciting and innovative, but that's not the way it feels at it as it is taught in like maybe a slightly more traditional classical education.
Yes, I think you need to encourage. I mean, one of the things is when they think, oh, but learning all this stuff, you have so many rules. Well, one of the rules is you have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to ornament on what you see. Uh, you don't just play a Bach piece, for example, might have no dynamics in it at all. That doesn't mean you don't play
Do
without any
them.
dynamics.
Yeah.
They have to come from you rather than a composer like Boulez or someone who writes every single note length, every how to play every single note. That has to come from you, and that's a question, I suppose you call it style, taste, whatever you like. You have to learn, but also you have to take risks. When you're doing, say, an orchestral audition, you're asked to play what's put in front of you, be it from the Janacek Sinfonietta or a piece of Wagner, but
Hmm.
they're not asked to think why you're doing it or how it might be improved, as opposed to playing a piece of Bach or where there are no dynamics. Everything has to come from you, and I feel that's very freeing once you don't mind making a mistake. When you're learning a language, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can either wait till you're perfect and then say something, or you can just crash straight in, make lots of mistakes, maybe have a couple of glasses of wine because that usually helps. But at least you're going out there. Even if you do crash and burn, you're speaking that foreign language, even if it's got some mistakes in it. And I find that, and of course, nothing in the arts is perfect. And nor should it be perfect from day to day. What you feel on Tuesday could be different on Wednesday. Uh, but it's great to go out there and just take the risk. It's wonderful to play continuo without having your right hand part written out. You just have to play what first thing that comes into your head. One of the people I admire most is a chap called Robert Levin, who improvises his cadenzas in Mozart concertos. And he says, it's like being shot out of the cannon at the circus. You might land badly, but it's and he always says, if you don't like that cadenza, you'll never hear it again because he's just simply made it up. And I've had a go at that. It is quite a risk. I wouldn't dare do it in public, but uh, I do it on my own. He
Yeah,
does
yeah,
it
yeah.
in
The
public.
Sure, in the
It's
privacy of
tremendous
your
fun.
practice room, and
Sure.
anything
And
goes.
singers in Handel opera who improvise their ornaments, I know quite a few who do. It's wonderful. It has that sense of spontaneity, which very often in the more, should I say, formal type of classical music, where we play what's written down and we don't personally, we're not allowed to contribute very much because what we're doing is interpreting the composer rather than interpreting your feelings about the composer. We're able much because there's not less there, we're able to interpret our feelings with greater freedom, shall we say. Of course, a really great player on the Sibelius Violin Concerto, the Brahms Violin Concerto, will put their feelings in, but it's building on a fairly big thing that the composer already wrote. With
Yeah, absolutely. And that as an orchestral musician, we're not only bound by what is on the page in front of us, but also the interpretation that the conductor wants to bring to the table. And there's not a lot of room.
not a lot of shimmy room, no. I find also when I'm working a lot with modern orchestras that I find it much easier actually to use my own parts, where not only do they have the bowings I've got, but if I want a crescendo here, I want this note to be short, I write it in uh, because that orchestra might the week before have been playing Shostakovich 5 and they have to go in to play a suite from a Rameau opera. It's a bigger gear change than is possible to do in a just instantly. So I find if I and I don't I think one thing conductors shouldn't do is preach. I know the answers, I'm going to teach them to you. It's very insulting. And of course, it's a great way to shorten the career of a young conductor. You're not going to come into a bunch of 50-year-olds and tell them they don't know the answers, but I do, and I'm 21. It doesn't get you very
Yes.
far.
Yes. Well, let's.
Nowadays, at my advanced age, many of the players are half my age, and so I can say I do have some experience of this. But
Yeah.
also, I've had experience playing in Europe, conducting in Europe. I'm thinking of one particularly about, 15, no, 25, 30 years ago, just after the wall came down. I was conducting a Handel oratorio in Vilnius in Lithuania. My Lithuanian is, I think I know one word, but the orchestra was from Moscow. Oh no, St. Petersburg, and they didn't speak Lithuanian either. And so we had to have two translators. So anything that I hadn't already prepared and put in the music had to be explained through two interpreters, one to the choir and one to the orchestra. So after a while, I just stayed up all night and marked the parts, so I didn't have to. It's a colossal waste of time. Um, but it's lovely to. Also, I think it helps to be very, very organized to say what you want, and then you can allow people to be free.
Yes. So the more clarity you bring to the equation as the conductor, as the leader, the
Sure.
more structure you bring, the more possible it is for people to play
Sure, you
within
could
that.
say, just have fun with this. If you miss one of these trills out, no one, your career won't be over. If you add a trill, just fine. This is a recitative. Follow the singer. They may do something today that they're not going to do tomorrow. It's not totally, doesn't have a straitjacket on it.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
nor does good opera either. But
Mhm. So, can we talk about like the journey from being a young conductor looking down at an orchestra, um, most of whom most of whom outages you? Like,
more
what is
experienced. But yeah,
more experienced?
in their
What
own
does?
way. Yeah.
Mhm, of course. So, like, can we talk about like the journey from that point, from your 29 years old based in St. Louis and playing with your friends and playing, um, to the thing that strikes me, this is not a question yet, I'm just like noticing. The thing that strikes me is how much enjoyment you obviously have and have had in all of these experiences that you're having. But like, it can't possibly look like that when you're in your early 30s and standing in front of a more experienced orchestra, or can it?
Well, a lot depends on what the orchestra is. Uh, there's no point in trying to get an orchestra to play in what you might call a Baroque style, but on modern instruments. If, for example, say the concertmaster has no interest in it. Uh, when I first went to a very famous orchestra in this country, which will remain nameless, every single one of the string principals was knocking 80 years old. There's no way I can say play Bach in the hip new way because they'd
Mm-hmm.
spent their careers playing it in another way. So you can only nudge certain things like tempo. When I first went to the LA Phil, which is an orchestra I adore, I think pretty much 90% of the first violin section were Russian emigres who have their very own style of playing that they'd learnt in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Wonderful, but very different from what I had been brought up. And if you have to, again, I bring my own parts, so it's all bowed. Uh, I don't sit there and say there will be no vibrato this week because that would be anathema to the sort of symphony playing that there was in the 90s. So I came slightly late to all this. It made it much easier. I got sometimes the students from the very first time that Oberlin and other places had in IU in Indiana had been playing on period instruments, but Baroque orchestras had started to be founded. So a lot of Baroque music on period instruments was being played on the radio. So then there was this terrible thing they did. They called it the Battle of the Bands. They have a modern orchestra and a Baroque orchestra both playing the same piece one after the other, and audiences were supposed to say which they liked. It made for terrible music making and created a what shall I say? Created a controversy when there wasn't one. Though there were, I must say, some people in the modern field who felt that the only reason why people played period instruments was because they weren't good enough to play real ones, or what they would say as real ones. And there was certainly a certain amount in the uh, period instrument movement of we are sort of, what should I say, we're the organic ones. We play music that's good for you. We know more than you do. This awful word authenticity, which doesn't exist. We don't know how Bach did a piece. We weren't there. Uh, and he may have done it differently on Monday to Tuesday. There's certain things you can know roughly, like how fast dances went, because we've got the notation and people know how to dance them. So if you do a minuet as glacially slowly as someone like Klemperer used to conduct it, no one would ever be able to do the dance steps which we have. Uh,
Because bodies only work a certain way.
Yes, we sort of know certain things like that. We've got cadenzas that survive from the 18th century, so we know what there's a cadenza in Messiah, for example. It's in one of the manuscripts. We know that that must have been done by somebody. So you're not making it up. Um, so I think it's good that also that there used to be these CDs, LPs they were, which were often produced in Germany, and it sort of said it had a kind of like a cordon bleu across the top saying Auf Originalinstrumenten, played on period instruments, as if that was somehow good enough. It could be a terrible performance, but it was good for you because it's on period instruments. Like it's saying it's organic, It can still
Yeah.
taste awful, whether it's if it's organic.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it's more authentic. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
certainly or modern orchestras, because of the sheer range of music that they have to perform, tended to look at style like cheap gloves, one size fits all. So they'd play Bach, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, and everything, pretty much all in the same way. And so what's happened, I think, over the years, and I'm very happy to see this, is it's kind of become a win-win situation. The period instrument people have become less hoity-toity about um, being proper and authentic and putting passion back into their music. And certainly modern orchestras have become much more interested in the basics of style, of playing Bach in a different way from how they play Mozart to how they would play Bruckner. So it's a win-win
Yeah.
situation, I think. And of course,
Yeah.
the colleges then have helped that in so many of them. I was just doing, I say, the Juilliard Orchestra, Baroque Orchestra. Uh, Most of those players had played in the modern orchestra, and then some of them came to the Baroque Orchestra as a sort of sideline. I found people in modern orchestras who like to use Baroque bows when they're playing Messiah and things because it's much lighter. They're not having to work so hard, but it gets a nice. The sound is the same, the bowings are the same, um, and so it's not that there's no longer that them versus us kind of feel. We're all in it together, and that's about making good and exciting music. And that's my job, of course, to get the passion into the music. And I'd like people to think, can you imagine if you went to a copy, a performance of, shall we say, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and you could advertise it in two ways. One is this will be the most moving performance you've ever been to, or we're going to use Shakespearean pronunciation and get all the words in the right order. I know which one I'd go to. You want
Yeah.
the both. You want them both. You want for it to be sensitive to how it might have been done in Shakespeare's day, but you want to have at least 3 boxes of Kleenex because you know you're going to need them.
Yes, because you want the music of the time to actually speak to you. This is something I talk about with my students quite a lot, actually. That um, if you are reading a Victorian novel, you're reading Dickens, you're reading
Yeah,
Hawthorne, you're like digging through this prose, you're reading Shakespeare even, you're digging through this prose, and suddenly it pops, and you're like, oh, this author is describing an actual human emotion that I too have felt. It's just like there's a lot of period language that we have to work through.
sure.
And but ultimately it's all communication. We want to get to the emotion of what is being created, and we want to get to the excitement of what is being created.
Sure. I mean, I have no problem looking, shall we say, at a Handel opera where everyone's kings and queens and dukes and stuff in a country that I've never been to. Uh, but what does matter is this woman is being insulted by this man, this
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. One of the ones that's really happens quite a lot in Handel opera is a lady has to basically have shall we say, a princess is shipped over to some country to marry a king she's never met. What
Mm-hmm.
does she feel like? Well, that was probably what quite a few of the rich people in the audience, the rich women in the audience, also felt like. It's not something we have in the same way now, unless you have an arranged marriage in India or somewhere. But it still happens.
Mm-hmm.
So
And there's
emotion.
yeah.
It doesn't matter that someone's got a crown; they're still a man or a woman, and
Yes.
that's just as important. And
Yes,
you should be able to
absolutely.
see through that sorry, I'm going to pour some water here. You should be able to see that to the emotions that are being expressed. And those composers, the Handels, the good composers, the Monteverdis, and so on, are those emotions are front and center. The fact that they might not be, say, in Handel in a language that you understand is no different from the audience back in Handel's day. They didn't speak Italian in London any more than we do. It's a different thing.
Yeah, it's about getting the emotion through. And so to like jump back to the earlier thread, if you find yourself conducting a modern orchestra where most people are Russian trained and heavy with their
Yeah,
vibrato and their
yeah,
bowing, um, it's about like meeting them where they are and trying to, is it is collaborate a word I can use?
I think it totally is. First of all, um, as I say, since the millennium, it's all so much easier. The concert masters are all much younger. They've been trained more broadly, be it in Curtis or Juilliard or wherever, the Colburn School in LA, which is terrific. Uh, they're all much more free and easy. Some of them even have Baroque bows in their cases. Uh, they're also likely to have played more of it. Cellos playing continuo and Bach cantatas. There are lots of churches that do Bach cantatas that used not to. Um, just that the when I was growing up, I would be lucky to hear maybe a dozen Haydn symphonies. Nobody ever played any other ones. Nowadays, there's just more on the concert menu. The radio's been great for this. Internet has been fantastic. Um, if I wanted to, as I did last week, I downloaded, which took one click, a very good recording of the complete Haydn symphonies, all 104 of them.
Yeah,
And they just sit on my computer. The access that you can gain to vast amounts of repertoire, different recordings, different manners of playing, uh, is so different from how it used to be. And I imagine well, there's no barrier now. If you live in Montana or uh, Mississippi, or a state which is far from an opera house, you can still watch the Met. You can watch Covent Garden. You can hear concerts stream. My concerts this weekend were both live streamed across the world
amazing.
from
Yeah,
from Juilliard and then from Yale. Um, you have access to so much more than one ever used to have, and that's brilliant.
it's it is truly amazing. It's a double-sided coin, I think, as we mentioned earlier. But you're exactly right. It's here now, and so
Yes,
there's no excuse for walking into an orchestra rehearsal without an idea of what it could be. Um,
sure. Also, you can. I think of teachers.
mhm.
COVID actually helped with this, though I wouldn't say it did much else for anybody else. But the fact that you could teach through Zoom meant that you could have a lesson from somebody in Amsterdam who is
Yes.
maybe the expert on something, and you could be in Omaha,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
that's terrific. Uh, that isn't that sense of the world really is your oyster, as it says in Shakespeare, and that's
yeah.
just fantastic.
I absolutely agree. I'm sitting right here in my room in Indiana, and I can have conversations with anybody in the world.
So, are you at Bloomington or?
No, I'm in South Bend.
Okay, I know where that is.
Yeah,
Yes,
cool. Um, Nicholas McGegan, this is such a pleasure. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but of course, like we cannot do that. Is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners that I haven't made space for in this conversation?
I think one thing that's important is that the feeling that with this music and period instruments and all that sort of stuff, that somehow you have to have a PhD to listen to it. There's so much musicology behind it. We're saying we've got exactly the right edition. We're really trying to do what the composer wrote. We're using the right instruments in the right positions in the right hall. Uh, and that ultimately doesn't matter at all. Just back to the idea that this this is to make you jump for joy, cry for grief, the emotions that the composer clearly felt him or herself, and getting those across to the people who are listening is the most important thing. The correctness is my problem. Sometimes you can't know, we shouldn't try. We can't really create a performance from 1727 or something. We can't. We can do certain things like get the music right. We can play it in a building that's about the right size. I mean, thank heavens now we have ladies in the orchestra. If we're going to be that authentic, we shouldn't. Orchestras stood up. It's quite nice to sit down now. But the things that matter and there's things that don't. but the meaning of the music, the passion that the composer wishes to put across to move the audience is everything to me. Whether it's a religious piece, you want to uh, heighten that. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I do a lot of religious music. Or whether it's an opera, where sometimes in something like Purcell, it's really very naughty. It's definitely quite adult music, and he wrote quite a lot of music to be sung in bars and pubs that would make a nun blush. But these were real people, and they had real emotions. They did real things, and that their music expresses that wonderfully. Whether it's to take you closer to God, as in Bach, in its own very passionate way, or whether it's the extravagance of a Handel opera, or frankly the sheer jokiness sometimes of a Haydn symphony.
Yeah. It's wonderful to hear you talk about this, to hear you share with us your knowledge and your love of this work. Thank you so
I
much.
love it. Thank you. My pleasure.